I'm Gwen Iacona. I'm an assistant research professor at Arizona State University, and I'm the assistant director for the Center of Biodiversity Outcomes. I also serve on the advisory board of the National Park Service, where I promote data-driven ecological decision-making. My dissertation research focused on the costs and benefits of managing protected areas, and now my work primarily focuses on how we can support conservation decision makers in achieving the outcomes that they are looking for. Once I ran a working group that generated guidance on how conservation scientists can better report on the costs of conservation action. And these recommendations ended up being incorporated into the instructions for authors at Conservation Biology Journal. So I'm proud of that every time I submit a paper. I do work on lots of cool stuff though. And some work I did with the US Fish and Wildlife Service on the Recovery Explorer tool is another project I'm super proud of. It changed a lot of the way that I think about working on things with people or end users, and what it means to work with entities who apply the type of research that I do on the ground. When I did my comprehensive exams, I didn't pass immediately. I got a pass with revisions, which really felt like failure to me. At the time, there were 4 of us in my lab group, and several of us did our comps around the same time, and everybody else passed with no revisions, and I had to do revisions. And it was super painful, and it felt like it was the low point of my PhD career. Getting through comprehensive exams or defending a prospectus is really hard. I felt like it was definitely the hardest part of it all. The final defense is a cakewalk in comparison to comprehensive exams. So for that exam, I had some chapters I was really confident about because they were things I'd been working on for a long time. But I also had some chapters that were doing things like ecological modeling that I'd only recently started doing and really was not feeling very confident about. And one of my committee members was, hotshot, super expert in the field. And he kept asking me these really hard questions that I had no idea what the answer was. And so they told me to go away and write a response to some of these questions that I didn't know what the answer were in the exam itself. And so essentially I had to go away and learn a bunch of new stuff. And I had a couple months, I don't remember how long it was, but I had to rewrite a whole section of my prospectus, the methodology part, the what are you doing and how do you do it? And so I did that for a while. And then I remember going to my advisor's office one day after it felt like forever working on these revisions. And I was like, I've got to finish this. It's ruining my life. And up to that point, I would do some writing and I'd bring it to him and he'd be like, no, do more, add more detail over here. And at this meeting, I was like, I just can't do anymore. I'm done. It's as good as I can get it. This is it. And I felt like it was particularly frustrating because everybody else was already past this hurdle. And I still felt like there was an overwhelming amount of stuff that I was trying to deal with all at once, and it was just not getting anywhere. And in that context, I think it's comprehensive exams in general, I think they're just designed to make you feel inadequate. And it's such a hard time in your life because you're asked to prove to some panel of experts that you have a plan for what you're doing and that you know what you're doing and that's a good idea and that you're filling some important gap in the field. And as a person, I definitely remember that time in my life as not really feeling like I wanted to get out of bed in the morning. A bunch of stuff was going on in my life, and then I had this inability to get past this hurdle, and it really took its toll. And I just felt like I was having tons of issues with motivation in general, just not feeling like I wanted to do stuff. So I definitely don't remember coping super well in the moment, but what happened was I completely changed what I was doing after that event I was talking about in my advisor's office. So I went out into the field for 3 months after my comps, after I finally turned the document in, after I declared that it was ruining my life. And that really helped me sort of get away from the experience and take the space to do something completely different. So I ended up doing field work all summer. I turned the thing in, and then it's like, bam, the next week I'm out in the field and I'm on this field project where I didn't actually have to do any of the logistics. It was great. All I had to do was walk around in the forest and identify trees. And so then I remember feeling like I just had this huge positive shift in my life where it was like, oh, I mean, it was raining all the time and there were ticks and we were hiking miles up and down steep hills, but like the pressure was off and I was doing something completely different. And, my mental health improved immediately as soon as I went out in the field. And I had 4 months when I wasn't sitting at my computer at all and I was out stomping around in Appalachia. So I'm not sure what it would have looked like for me to pull myself out of that hole if I'd not had that field work, but it was super helpful for me because it just, by the time I got back from the field, all the pain of the comps had sort of faded into the distance and I was ready to re-engage in deep thinking stuff again. So it wasn't intentional that it worked out that way, but it was helpful and effective. And, while I was in the field, the feeling of failure didn't matter anymore because I was doing something completely different. The reason I was on that project was I was the only person in the lab who could identify trees, and I was really good at it. And it felt really nice to go do something I was really good at, which was sort of the opposite of how I had been feeling. And so, while I was out walking around in the field, I was also able to take the headspace to just figure out what I wanted with the PhD overall. Why am I even doing this? And I think it's a useful reminder that recentering and reminding yourself of the things that you're good at is so important so that you can hone in on your strengths. So I do think these days I would be much more likely to look for help in a situation like this, be it from a trusted friend or a mentor. At that time, I was just trying to push myself through. It's funny, in a way, I do feel like I'm less resilient these days in that I don't push myself through and I recognize when I need help. But at the time, when stuff was hard, I just kind of gritted my teeth and kept on going, even though it was so hard. I don't recommend that as a coping strategy, though. And, now that I'm kind of on the other side of the table at the comprehensive exams, I know that asking for revisions is not actually an indicator of ability or self-worth or anything like that. It's just the way that we get better science. But that was definitely not the way that it felt at the time. And so I really try to remember that feeling when I work with students these days. I know this is probably a problem with the way that grad school is, but I've never met anybody who didn't have a failure challenge in grad school. It's going to be hard. Failure is somewhat inevitable. But I think if you know that going in and you make sure that you've got some kind of support system, that's really helpful and really necessary. Thanks for watching Fail-Safe Science. My name is Gwen Iacona, and I hope my story helps graduate students feel less alone.